Tonight, we're recapping the chapter, Writing a Soul Training Plan. And we're going to be talking about not so much about what happened this last week, but what happens going forward from tonight. How we can continue to grow and live inside of some of the things we've been learning this past year. And as I was getting ready for tonight's session, my mind actually went back to May 18th of 2020. And it was on that Saturday that I ran my first ever 5-kilometer race as part of the Fredericton Marathon. I got a little picture of myself with my little reward medal that I got for doing that. Now, last year the Fredericton Marathon couldn't happen in person, so it was a virtual 5K. I had to run it by myself. But here's the thing. I had never run a 5K before, and so my kids were waiting for me when I got back to the house, and as you can tell, I looked a little exhausted and sweaty. It was not very attractive, but I did it. I ran 5 kilometers, and I'd never done it, so the question that came up was, how did I manage to do this? And the success of my story, which is not some amazing success, but it was a success for me, the success of that story actually began in February of 2020. Because in February of 2020, we have a group at our church that's called Soul to Soul Runners, S-O-L-E to S-O-U-L, Soul to Soul Runners, and they throw every so often what they call a Learn to Run group together. And in February of that year, they said on Tuesday nights, we're going to be running one of our Learn to Run classes, and so you can come and learn to run. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to sign up for Learn to Run. I could benefit from a little more exercise in my life, so I'm going to sign up for this class, and I'm going to start showing up on Tuesday nights. And each Tuesday and Saturday, I would meet with this group, and they gradually warmed me up to running. Now, here's some of the things that I found were really important when I joined Soul to Soul Runners. First of all, when I showed up that first week, they handed me a little piece of paper that had a 10-week plan on how to go from not really running to running a 5-kilometer race. And the goal was to do it in time for the Fredericton Marathon race. That was the plan. And so they had this plan that would take you from point A to point B. And you know, the very first week, the way you ran is you would run for 1 minute and walk for 1.5 minutes. And you'd do that like 8 times. You'd run for 1 minute and you'd walk for 1.5 minutes. And that's where I started. I was running with them and I'd do 1 minute, walk for 1.5 minutes. Till eventually at the point when I ran the 5K, I ran my 5K in just over 25 minutes, about 5 minutes a kilometer, and I ran 25 minutes straight. If I had tried to run 25 minutes straight on day 1, I would have quit. It was horrible. In fact, running a minute at a time felt horrible at the start, to be honest with you. But they work you into it. So first of all, you had this repetition. You had a plan. Second thing is, I had an encouraging group of people. Most of the folks in the group and the running group had actually been people who'd run either a marathon or a half marathon or a 10K or a 5K race before. But here's the thing. They slowed down and ran with me. And they were very encouraging, and they had nice food at the group too. They got runners, they earn their energy, so they eat nice food afterwards. It was kind of fun. And so I really enjoyed it. So they slowed down, and they also taught me techniques on how to run and what running was like, and they had a little class piece. But the thing I found most encouraging is on Saturday morning, they would get down at the green. In fact, they still get down every Saturday morning at the green, go for a run. And back in those days, they go to the Happy Baker for breakfast afterwards. And there was this fellowship and this camaraderie among the group that were there. And the only thing was, I was really enjoying the Learn to Run group, but mid-March, COVID-19 hit, and that meant that was the end of the group meetings. But even though I didn't have the regular group meetings, there was a Facebook group that I could hop on, and we'd send pictures and message each other. I decided to take a couple people from the group and text them when I'd go for my run, just to say I'm keeping on top of this. And through that accountability and the plan I received from there, even though I had to finish the second half of my training on my own, except for virtual encouragement, I managed to finish it and I ran my 5K. Now, I tell you this exciting story because I like storytelling and I'm pretty proud of having run 5K, to be honest with you. But the kinds of things we need if we're going to succeed in our spiritual walk are the same kind of things I needed to succeed in running a 5K. I needed a plan. I needed encouragement of peers. I needed some help to learn. And because I had those things, I was able to move forward. because God's designed us to need those types of things in our life. On the flip side of that, how many of us can think of a great New Year's resolution or two that we've created on a whim, where we didn't really have a plan, we didn't have anyone really to encourage us, we didn't know what we're doing, and it failed? Anyone ever do one of those? Yeah, a few of us here? No, I see some people who've always had successful New Year's resolutions, or maybe they were smart enough never to make them in the back over there. So what we're going to talk about tonight is just basically the idea of having a rule for life. And this is discussed in the chapter about how many groups in Christian history would come up with guidelines for how do I live? What are the things that can help me in my spiritual walk? And sometimes it's a particular religious group or a denomination or a group of people around a leader, and they'll say, you know what, this is the way we think we're going to encourage each other in discipleship. And here's the thing I want to say. I think we need to be careful, because in this talking about a rule of life, we're talking about trying to create a regimen. We're talking about trying to create a plan. In the same way that when I went to the running group, they said, okay, if you want to run 10K, you don't run 25 minutes straight your first day out of the gate. You run for a minute, and then you walk a bit. And we'll encourage you as you move in that. We want to create something that's a plan to help guide us towards the end goal. And the end goal is not to be able to say, I completed the plan. The end goal when it comes to our spiritual rule of life is to grow in our love of God, to grow in our love for other people. It actually is to live out the greatest commandment. Jesus said in Matthew 22, verses 37 to 40, when asked what the greatest commandment was, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. The law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Inside of this teaching of Jesus, we see the essential act of a follower of Jesus is to begin with growing in love for God, growing in love for others. And there's even the implied thought of care for self. So when we look at the book and we ask, hey, Smythe says, all right, here's how you can begin to build a rule for life. We're going to talk about some of the practical steps here tonight. The first thing one needs to do is he suggests, why don't you take the book, and actually the books. We had 3 books in this series, and over the course of those books, we did over 30 different spiritual practices over the course of this year. If you've been doing them each week and trying them out as we go along, you've tried over 30 things this year. Hey, how cool is that? How many of you would have tried 30 different spiritual practices, some of them which are ones that you wouldn't normally just have thought of on your own if you hadn't been in a course like this? Good job to all of you. So way to go. But he says, why don't you take those, and the first thing you want to do is maybe pick 5 or 10 of those things that you've done this year and say, what are 5 or 10 things that were really meaningful and connected with me this year? Now, that doesn't mean they were the easiest things. It doesn't even mean they're the most enjoyable things. What are 5 or 10 things that you tried this year and you said, you know what? That connected with me. I would benefit from maybe looking at that again. So you take those things. And here's one of the things. When you make that, and we're going to come back to this a bit later, you want to try and see if you can find things that relate to each of those 3 key relationships that are in the greatest commandment. How do I express my love towards God in worshipful ways? And there are practices that are more, for lack of a better term, God-centric. How do I do things that help me express my love for others, like reconciliation or prayer or giving to others or stewarding the things that matter most, treasuring my treasures, for example? And how are there some things in here that help me take care of my own soul, that help me grow in myself? So make a list of those things. Now, after that, we want to take some time, and then we want to make a list of other practices you might want to include that aren't in the books. There are lots of spiritual practices that are not inside of the book. So you might say, all right, here's a practice that I've had before in my life that I used to practice. Or maybe even some things that aren't necessarily spiritual practices that you think of classically spiritually, but things that are significant in your life. You know, I know some people that just find being quiet and spending some time reading is very refreshing to them. They say, I'm going to put something like that. Maybe exercise. You say, you know what? We didn't have any spiritual practices from the book, which were exercise, but taking care of your body is a spiritual practice. if we nurture ourselves. Because, God gave you a body. God just didn't make you a spirit. He made you in flesh as well. And we talk about the significance of the incarnation of Christ is that God redeems and transforms the world. And so what does God want to do when we care for that? So maybe finding things like that, because we want to try and create a rule for our life. Maybe there's relationships we need to nurture. And then once we've done that, this is where the practice gets interesting, we need to look at how often and how long. For example, the practice of silence. One could say, I need to practice, 5 minutes of silence 3 times a week. And, that's idea of practicing silence and observing nature and listening for God in silence. That's one way to do it. Another person might say, I think I need to have 4 hours of silence 5 times a week. Now, I could maybe that's you, and God bless you if you can accomplish that, but I have 4 small children, a wife, and a job. The only way I can have 4 hours of silence in a given week is to go to sleep. This is why I say this, and I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but we need to say, all right, what would be beneficial, but also, and here's the thing that comes back, and it's related to step 4, what is the right moderation? And here's the thing, sometimes I find when people are looking at engaging in spiritual practices, they begin by saying, I need to have an hour of this and an hour of that and an hour of this, when they've not done any of those things. And then they immediately say, this is impossible. The life in Jesus is impossible. I can't do this. I might as well just quit. It would be like me saying, I'm going to go to the running group and I'm going to start running 25 minutes straight out of the blocks. The reason I was able to run my 5K eventually was because I started with 3 days a week and small portions at first. And then as my heart and my life expanded, or my ability to run expanded, I was able to add to that. And similarly, we want to look and say, okay, what is the right amount that will be a discipline to push me, but will not become overwhelming for me? And then how do we balance that? How am I doing all things that are just about self and not necessarily worshipful or looking towards God or caring for others? How do I make sure I put those things in my life? So once we've done all that, you'd say, all right, I've created my own plan and I'm all set to go. But here's the thing. We also need to ask the question. And those are the 4 basic steps that we take. And one thing I would say is when you make a list of 5 to 10 things at the start, all 5 to 10 things will probably not be on your plan when you get done. If you have 25 different disciplines you need to do this week, you're probably going to overwhelm yourself. That becomes a list that you start from as you prayerfully say, what do I need at this time in my life? But then here's the question you need to ask. Who are the people that are going to give you feedback? Because here's the thing I realize. I can deceive myself, and I have my own blind spots. When I started in the running group, I thought I understood some things about running, and one of the things I realized about myself is I'm tall. I'm not exceptionally tall, but I'm not short, and I've got pretty long legs. And so I thought when I started in the running group, that the way to get a good time and have a good pace was to take really long strides. And so if you looked at me when I was running, I would look like I was almost bounding from place to place. I'd be stretching my legs out, big things, because I got these long things. And actually in the running group, I was kind of at the head of the pack all the time because I was taking these big strides. And then Mark Kozak, who actually is the leader of the Soul to Soul running group, along with some other people, he talked to me from it. He says, Chad, you know what? And they were talking about this inside of the lesson one night. They said, you know what? If you take really long strides as opposed to shorter strides, you increase your risk of injury when you're running that way. And actually, it's tough to increase your pace because you're in the air more of the time, and so you can't propel yourself. Because, when you take that long stride, I can't speed myself up once I'm in the air. So he said, if you actually take shorter strides, you're less likely to twist your ankle or something because you're not airborne as long. And actually, if you speed up those shorter strides, you're actually able to go faster than you would be in the long run if you have this, and it's less abusive on your body. Running tip of the day. Thank you, Mark, for that. Now, here's the thing. I didn't know this because I didn't have experience in running like Mark did. But because I shared my stride, shared my practice with him, I was able to learn from him and learn how to run more smoothly and less likely hurt myself. And I say this in the same way when we talk about our spiritual practice plan, you need to show it to somebody. We're not designed to try and figure everything out on our own. Think of a great passage from the Old Testament that says the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And I say that just to say we have the potential to kind of think we know the best thing for ourselves. And if we never expose our thoughts and plans to other people, what we convince ourselves of can be something that's actually not to our benefit in the long run, or is out of balance, or can lead us to a place that we don't want to go. So we need to say, who's going to give us feedback? You know, I've been working on my list, and I'll share a couple things with it from you that I'm thinking about. But for me, what I want to do with this is I want to go home and I want to run this by my wife, because she sees my blind spots. She's very familiar with some of my idiosyncrasies. But I'm not going to share everything, because quite frankly, I say you shouldn't share publicly things you think might not materialize in the private world. But I'll share a couple things, like I'm taking a look and saying, maybe I want to spend some time in silence and awareness of creation 3 times a week. Or something that's not really a spiritual practice, but I think would help me to rest and take Sabbath. And rest is, I'm hoping to go sailing 3 to 4 times a month this summer. Those are things that I think will be refreshing for me, as well as other practices. I'm not going to tell you all of them, but because I need to run them by my wife first. It's my practices. If you can read my handwriting from a distance, you can know them. There you go. That'll never happen. Someone's going to go Zoom on that tonight at home, I know. But here's the thing. You need to go and find people. Say, okay, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Can you speak to me about the wisdom of this? Am I missing something? Am I being too ambitious? Am I not being ambitious enough inside of these things? The other side of feedback then also becomes find a way to live your rule in community. Who are you doing it with? Who are you doing your practices with? Or even if you're not doing the exact same practices with someone, who are the people in your life that know what you're trying to do, that can be your encouragement, that can come alongside of you? I think about my experience in starting with the Soul to Soul Runners group. You know what? When I wanted to start running, I got together with this group, and we would run together. And they would slow down their pace with me, and then, the Saturday morning runs, because the Tuesday one was like the regimented one, and we'd do the same regimen on Saturday, but then some of them would run with me, and then because they were accomplished runners, I hopped in my car to drive over to the place we went to breakfast. They would run to the place for breakfast, another 3K, just because they could. And I share that to say, maybe there's somebody who's further along the running than you that you just need to share your practice with, and even though they're doing things that are different, or things that you might not be ready for, or things that don't fit with where you are right now. But we need to find those people. One of the things I'm hoping to do and I'm praying about is who are going to be the people, aside from my wife, that I invite into my practice to help me keep on pace. Who are going to be, we talked in 1 week here about finding an accountability friend. And I remember, Karen, you shared a bit of a testimony about what you were thinking about and looking for someone like that, and other people that have been that in your life as we did the course. Who is that person? Who are those people that you bring around to say, I'm running with you. I'm part of the big body. I'm part of the family of God, but you're my running buddy. You're going to be my encouragement, and I'm going to encourage you if you're willing to. That's what I really think is essential. If we're going to take this book, we're at the end of the study tonight. If we're going to take this book and it's going to benefit us, then here's the thing. That's going to require a commitment, not to the book, but to wanting to take what we've learned and put it into practice. Jesus said at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, those who hear my words and put them into practice are like a man who built his house on rock. And the rains came and the waters rose, and that house stood firm. But those who hear my words and do not put them into practice are like a man who built his house on sand, and the rains came and the waters rose, and that house fell because it was built on sand. It had no foundation. And the thing I want to say about that is when Jesus talked about being solid and being strong, he said it's not just about hearing things. It's about hearing things and then putting them into practice. Now, I know James Bryan Smith did not write the Bible, but the kind of principles we've taken a look at here, like spiritual practices and getting to know who God is and focusing on those things, are things that are based out of Scripture. The goal is to say, what are the practices based in Scripture that can help us to grow in our life? And can we not just know how to recount them if we end up in like Christian Jeopardy or Christian Wheel of Fortune? That's not enough. It's enough to say, how are these things being ingrained into my heart and into my life? So take some time tonight. I really encourage you as we get ready to go, if you've not done it yet, get an ugly piece of paper like I did. I took like the backside of some notes I had, and I scrawled out my starting point of 9 things that I'm going to put in front of someone else. Take the time to scrawl this out. The homework we have for next week is to work on this. And here's the thing I would say to you as well, is that by its very nature, something like this is going to change over time. Don't think I've written the rule for life and it'll be the same for me now as it will be till the end of my days. No. If you grow and mature, ideally, if I can run a 5K last year, I should be able to stretch and go into doing a 6K. Or maybe I'll take up biking. Or maybe I'll do something different that'll stretch me in new ways. For me, my goal in writing this is my rule for summer 2020. Because the pace of life in my life and work and what happens in my family looks different in the summer than it does in the fall. And the things I want to grow into this summer might look different than the things I need to grow into the fall. And some of those things will stay the same and some of them will change. So don't feel burdened by that, but take the time to invest in what God's doing in your life today and take steps and show it to someone else and find somebody who can cheer you on. And maybe in a few months' time, you'll celebrate that you ran your first spiritual 5K. Anyway, that's what I want to encourage you with tonight.